The heavy iron chains clanged against the weathered wooden platform, a sound that silenced the restless crowd in Redemption Valley. It was a blistering afternoon in 1870, the Arizona sun unrelenting, casting stark shadows across the dusty square. These weren't the chains of slavery emancipation had come 5 years prior, but the chains of debt, binding a woman to an auction block to settle her late husband's obligations. At the back of the crowd stood Ezekiel Kane, a black cowboy whose presence drew curious glances. His skin gleamed with sweat, and a jagged scar ran from his left ear to his jaw, a silent testament to a life of hardship. He'd ridden into town that morning, his saddlebags heavy with gold earned from years of bounty hunting. Ezekiel wasn't here for land or cattle. He'd come for her. The auctioneer's voice cut through the murmurs. Lillian Caldwell, widow of the late Henry Caldwell, to be sold into 7 years of indentured servitude to clear her husband's gambling debts. The crowd stirred, a mix of fascination and unease. In the chaotic years following the Civil War, such auctions, though rare, were not unheard of. Lillian stood tall on the platform, her faded blue dress patched, but worn with dignity. Her hazel eyes burned with defiance, though her hands trembled at her sides. She was a woman who had once wielded power, who had once owned Ezekiel when he was a boy on her Georgia plantation. She was also the woman who had branded him, her cold command searing his flesh and his soul. Now, fate had reversed their roles in a way neither could have imagined. Ezekiel's hand brushed the hidden scar beneath his shirt, a mark Lillian had ordered when he was 16, punishment for a crime he didn't commit. The memory fueled every step of his long journey to Redemption Valley. As the bidding began, he watched her skin the crowd, her gaze darting from bidder to bidder, local merchants, a saloon keeper, a rancher. The price crept up, $50, $75, $100. Then her eyes locked on Ezekiel. Recognition struck like lightning. Her face paled, lips parting in silent shock. 20 years had passed, but some faces were etched deeply to fade. She knew who he was, and she knew the weight of their shared past. The auctioneer called for higher bids. Ezekiel stepped forward, his boots thudding against the wooden planks. The crowd hushed. Lillian's breath caught, her defiance faltering. She didn't know that Ezekiel hadn't come for vengeance. He'd come for something far more perilous, something that would challenge the town's notions of justice, mercy, and redemption. Ezekiel raised his hand with a calm that belied the storm within. $300. The crowd erupted in gasps. $300 was a fortune in Redemption Valley, more than most families saw in years. The other bidders fell silent, unable to match such a sum. But Lillian's reaction was what drew every eye. Terror washed over her, her head shaking frantically. "No," she whispered, then louder, "No, anyone but him." The auctioneer, flustered by her outburst, banged his gavel. "Ma'am, this gentleman's offer clears your debts in full." "You don't understand," Lillian's voice cracked with desperation. "That man is." "Go in once," the auctioneer interrupted, ignoring her pleas. Ezekiel's gaze never wavered, his expression unreadable. Inside, memories surged. The plantation where he was born into bondage, the fields where he toiled. The day Lillian had singled him out for punishment. A tool had gone missing, and though he was innocent, she'd needed a scapegoat. The iron brand glowed red in the fire as she said, "Maybe this will teach you your place, boy." "Goin' twice." The gavel hovered. A voice cut through the tension. "Hold on a minute." Sheriff Amos Reed stepped forward, his badge glinting. "I know that face. You're the shadow tracker, aren't you? The bounty hunter." Ezekiel nodded. His reputation preceded him. In 3 years, he'd brought in over 40 outlaws, earning a name whispered from Texas to California. Some called him the best tracker in the West, others swore he had unnatural gifts, finding men no matter where they hid. "What's a man like you doing at our auction?" the sheriff asked, eyes narrowing. "Personal business," Ezekiel replied, his voice low but firm. Lillian's heart pounded. She'd seen that same resolve in his eyes 20 years ago, right before she sold him to erase the evidence of her cruelty and to escape the haunting promise of retribution in his gaze. "Sold," the gavel slammed down. The crowd began to disperse, but Ezekiel remained, staring up at the woman who had once owned him, now bound to him for 7 years. Sheriff Reed approached, Shadow tracker, I don't know what history you to have, but this is a lawful transaction. Whatever you're planning, I'll honor the law, Ezekiel said. 7 years of service, as contracted. The words sent a chill through Lillian. 7 years under the man she'd tortured, branded, and treated as less than human. As the sheriff walked away, Ezekiel spoke directly to her. Get down. The command echoed the ones she'd given him countless times. Now, the roles were reversed. Lillian descended the platform on unsteady legs, standing before him as a woman stripped of her former power. What do you want? She whispered. Ezekiel studied her, then did something that stunned them both. He smiled, not a smile of vengeance, but something deeper, more complex. First, he said, we're going to talk about your daughter. Lillian's knees buckled. Her daughter, Clara, was a secret she'd buried deep, a child given up for adoption when her world collapsed after her husband's death. No one in Redemption Valley knew Clara existed. How could Ezekiel? My daughter, she stammered. I don't know what you're talking about. Clara Caldwell, born April 10, 1848, Ezekiel said, his voice precise. Given to the Sisters of Grace Orphanage in Tucson when she was 4 months old. Blonde hair, hazel eyes like yours, with a small scar above her right eyebrow from a fall as a baby. Lillian's hand flew to her mouth. The scar was a detail only someone who'd seen Clara could know. She'd kissed that tiny mark every night during the 4 months she'd held her daughter, before poverty forced her to let go. How do you? She began. Because I found her, Ezekiel said. The words hit like a blow. Lillian stumbled, and Ezekiel steadied her with a gentle touch, the same touch he'd once used to comfort others on the plantation when her back was turned. Where is she? Lillian's voice was raw with desperation, every maternal instinct roaring back to life. That depends on you. Ezekiel guided her to his horse, a powerful chestnut stallion that mirrored his quiet strength. From his saddlebag, he pulled a small photograph and handed it to her. Lillian's breath caught. The young woman in the image was unmistakably Clara, now 18, tall and poised, with her mother's eyes and her father's determined chin. But something else stopped Lillian's heart. Clara wore a nurse's uniform, standing outside a military hospital. She's been working with the 10th Cavalry Regiment for a year, Ezekiel explained. The Buffalo Soldiers, one of the first all-black units in the Army. But she's not. She's not black, Lillian interrupted, her mind reeling. Clara had been raised in an orphanage with children of all backgrounds, and in her heart, those soldiers were her family. She doesn't know who her real mother is, Ezekiel continued. Believes her parents died in a fire, but she's set to head into Apache territory next week with the regiment. Dangerous work. Nurses don't always come back. The implicit threat was clear. Clara was in peril, and Ezekiel was her only hope of reaching her in time. What do you want from me? Lillian asked, though she feared the answer. I want you to know what it's like to lose everything you love, Ezekiel said softly. But not the way you think. He mounted his horse and extended a hand. You're coming with me to Tucson. We're going to find your daughter together. Lillian stared at his hand, the same hand she'd seen scarred by her orders. Now it offered her only chance to save Clara. Why would you help me? She whispered. Ezekiel's expression grew distant. Because Clara isn't just your daughter, Lillian. The way he said her name sent shivers down her spine. He'd never been allowed to use it before. But there was something in his tone, a hint of a connection she hadn't yet grasped. What do you mean? She asked. Get on the horse, Ezekiel said, and I'll tell you a story about a 16-year-old slave sold from your plantation. A boy who spent years tracking every soul scattered from that place. A boy who learned one of them held a secret that changes everything. Lillian took his hand, her need to know outweighing her fear. As they rode out of Redemption Valley, Ezekiel began to speak, his voice barely audible over the horse's hooves. After you sold me, I ended up on a Texas ranch. Worked 5 years to earn my freedom papers. But I never forgot that plantation. Never forgot the people torn apart like leaves in a storm. The desert stretched before them, vast and unforgiving, dotted with cacti and the bones of long-dead trees. Lillian, riding close, saw Ezekiel differently now, not the frightened boy she remembered, but a man forged by survival, exuding a quiet strength. I started tracking everyone who'd been sold, he continued. Most were dead. Some had new lives. but one person I could never finna me own who vanished right around the time Clara was born. Lillian's heart raced. Who? A slave named Jonah, about 20 years old, worked in your husband's stables. Rumor was he'd been caught with a white woman and sold off fast to avoid trouble. The name hit Lillian like a stone. Jonathan, kind, with eyes that had offered her solace during the darkest days of her marriage. Her husband's drinking and gambling had trapped her in a private hell, and Jonah had been her refuge, their stolen moments a dangerous secret. That's impossible, she whispered. Jonah was sold before Clara was born. Was he? Ezekiel's voice carried a weight that made her stomach twist. Or was he sold because Clara was about to be born? The truth crashed over her. The timeline aligned her husband's sudden rage, his insistence on giving Clara away, claiming poverty when they still had means. He'd known about her affair with Jonah, sold him to protect the family's name, and forced her to surrender Clara to erase any trace of her origins. I found Jonah 2 years ago, Ezekiel said gently. He's in Nevada now, a carpenter. Never knew what happened to you or the child. Never knew he had a daughter. Lillian's world tilted. Clara was Jonah's daughter, the child of a love forbidden by a cruel world. And now, that child was serving with an all-black regiment, unaware of her true heritage. Is Jonah, she began. Still alive, Ezekiel said. Still asking about you every time I see him. The words were a lifeline she was afraid to grasp. Jonah was alive, thinking of her after all these years. Why are you telling me this? She asked, her voice trembling. Ezekiel paused, his words heavy with pain. Because Jonah saved my life once. When your husband was beating me for that missing tool of one you blamed me for, Jonah stepped in. Took half the punishment. He didn't have to. Could have looked away like everyone else. Lillian closed her eyes, shame flooding her. She'd been so consumed by her own despair that she'd lashed out, making Ezekiel a scapegoat for her pain. He protected me when no one else would, Ezekiel said. Now his daughter is heading into danger, and her mother is the only one who can save her. That's why I bought you, Lillian. Not for revenge, but to give you a chance to do something right. They rode through the afternoon, the sun a merciless eye overhead. Lillian's mind reeled, but one question burned brightest. If you know where Clara is, and you know where Jonah is, why do you need me? Ezekiel's jaw tightened. Because your daughter hates everything about the South, everything about plantation owners, everything about people like you. The words struck like blows. What do you mean? The nuns at the orphanage told her parents were wealthy Southerners, who abandoned her out of shame. She grew up believing rich white folks discarded her like refuse. That's why she joined the Buffalo Soldiers' medical UNITO fight against everything she thinks her parents stood for. Lillian felt sick. Her sacrifice, meant to protect Clara, had been twisted into a lie that fueled her daughter's hatred. She won't listen to me, Ezekiel continued. A black bounty hunter with stories about her real parents. She'll think I'm lying, trying to manipulate her. But Yush might hate you, but seeing her mother risk everything could change how she sees you. They crested a hill, and smoke rose in the distance, not the thin wisps of a campfire, but thick black columns. Ezekiel spurred his horse faster. As they neared, the source became clear, a stagecoach, overturned and burning. Bodies scattered like broken dolls. Apache raid, Ezekiel said grimly, dismounting to inspect the scene. Recent, maybe an hour ago. Lillian stayed mounted, pale at the carnage. Ezekiel studied the ground, finding fresh tracks leading to a rocky outcropping. Someone survived, he said. They're hiding up there. They approached cautiously, Ezekiel calling out in English and Spanish. A weak voice answered, "Help, please." Behind two boulders lay a young woman in a nurse's uniform, blood seeping from a head wound. Lillian's heart stopped. Blonde hair, hazel eyes, the scar above her eyebrow. It was Clara. "Ma'am," Clara whispered, "thank God." The Apache took the others. "I thought I'd die here." Lillian couldn't speak, her throat tight with emotion. Her daughter was alive, wounded but alive, looking at her with trust. She had no idea who Lillian was. Ezekiel knelt beside Clara, checking her wounds. "What's your name?" "Clara Thompson, nurse with the 10th Cavalry. We were escorting medical supplies." Apache hit at dawn. Her voice was weak but steady. "Can you ride?" Ezekiel asked. "I think so." Clara's gaze shifted to Lillian. "Ma'am, you look familiar. Do I know you?" The question hung like a loaded gun. Lillian struggled to respond, but Ezekiel spoke. "Actually, Clara, there's something you need to know about this woman. Something that'll change everything you believe about your life." Clara struggled to sit up, wincing. "What are you talking about?" Lillian realized Ezekiel hadn't just brought her to save Clara from the Apache Wars. He'd orchestrated this momentous auction, the ride, finding Clara wounded to force a reckoning. Clara looked between them, confusion deepening. "What's going on? You two know each other." "We have history," Ezekiel said. "But that's not what matters now." "Then what does?" Clara asked, pain sharpening her tone. Ezekiel's eyes met Lillian's, signaling the moment of truth. "Clara, what do you know about your real parents?" "My real parents," Clara's voice turned bitter. "Rich plantation owners who threw me away like garbage. The nun said they were too ashamed to keep a child they couldn't provide for." She laughed, a hollow sound. "Funny thing is, they could have provided. They just chose not to." Lillian felt each word like a dagger. Her sacrifice had become Clara's deepest wound. "What if you were wrong?" Ezekiel asked. "What if the story you were told wasn't the whole truth?" Clara studied him, her sharp mind cutting through her pain. "You're leading somewhere. Just say it." "This woman," Ezekiel said slowly, "is Lillian Caldwell. She owned a plantation in Georgia before the war." Clara's expression hardened. "A slave owner." "Yes," Ezekiel said, "but she's also something else." The silence was suffocating. Lillian felt Clara's hatred, understanding why Ezekiel had forced this moment. Clara needed to see her as a person, not a symbol of evil. "She's your mother," Ezekiel said. Clara staggered back, her face cycling through disbelief, anger, and a flicker of hope before settling on rage. "That's impossible." "Look at her eyes," Ezekiel said gently. "Her face. You said she looked familiar." Clara stared, recognition dawning. The same eyes, the same jaw, the same tilt of the head. "No," she whispered. "She abandoned me. She gave me away because she was ashamed." "She gave you away to save your life," Ezekiel corrected. "Because your real father wasn't her husband." Clara's mind reeled. "My father? A slave named Jonah," Ezekiel said. "A good man who loved your mother and never knew you existed." Clara's knees buckled. Ezekiel eased her onto a boulder. "I'm the son of a slave? You're the daughter of two people who loved each other in a world that would have killed them for it." Ezekiel said, "Your mother didn't abandon you out of shame. She saved you from a husband who would have murdered you both if he'd known." Clara looked at Lillian, pain and confusion in her eyes. "Is it true?" Lillian's voice broke. "Yes, you're my daughter. I've loved you every day since I let you go." But Ezekiel's gaze shifted to the horizon. "We need to move. Those Apache are coming back, and they've brought friends." Apache war cries echoed through the canyon, a dozen riders approaching fast. Ezekiel counted their numbers, his mind racing. "Can you shoot?" he asked Clara, handing her a revolver. "Buffalo soldiers don't survive by being poor shots," she replied, checking the cylinder, though her movements betrayed her pain. "There's a narrow pass a quarter-mile north," Ezekiel said, pointing to a gap in the rocks. "If we reach it, they'll have to come single file." "And if we can't?" Lillian asked. "Then we make our stand here." They mounted up, Clara behind Ezekiel, Lillian on her own horse. But the Apache closed the distance too quickly, their knowledge of the terrain unmatched. Arrows flew, one grazing Lillian's arm, another embedding in her saddle. Ezekiel veered toward a box canyon, its steep walls a dead end. Lillian's heart sank. "What are you doing?" "Trust me," Ezekiel called. At the canyon's end, he dismounted, pulling aside brush to reveal a hidden forgotten silver mine he'd scouted that morning. They led the horses inside as the Apache reached the canyon mouth. The tunnel was dark and narrow, but led to another exit. In the darkness, Clara spoke. "You planned all this, didn't you? The auction, finding me, the Apache attack." "Not the attack," Ezekiel said. "That was chance. But the resties." "Why?" Lillian's voice echoed. "Because sometimes the only way to heal is to face the wounds together." They emerged on the mountain's far side as the sun set, the Apache still searching the canyon. For the first time, they had a moment of safety. Clara sat on a boulder, exhaustion and blood loss taking their toll. "I need to understand something," she said to Lillian. If you're my mother and you gave me up to save me, why didn't you come for me after the war? After slavery ended? Lillian's voice was heavy. Because I was a coward. I convinced myself you were better off without me. I was afraid you'd hate me for giving you away. Clara studied her in the fading light. What happens now? Before anyone could answer, Ezekiel tensed, his hand on his gun. We have company, and it's not Apache. 3 riders approached through the twilight, white men in military uniforms, but not regular cavalry. Bounty hunters, led by Captain Elias Holt, a scarred veteran. Nurse Thompson, Holt called, "You're under arrest for desertion." Clara stood, defiant despite her wounds. Captain Holt, I was wounded in the Apache attack. These people saved me. The report says you were found miles from the attack with suspicious characters. Holt replied, looks like you were running. Lillian's heart broke. After finding her daughter, she faced losing her to a noose. But Ezekiel stepped forward. Captain, I'm Ezekiel Kane, the shadow tracker. I can vouch for this woman's character. She fought bravely, saved this woman's life. He gestured to Lillian. Orders are orders, Holt said. She comes with us. Clara spoke, her voice steady. Captain, what if I had information about Apache movements? Intelligence that could save lives. Holt leaned forward. What kind? The attack wasn't random, Clara said, glancing at Ezekiel for approval. They're planning a larger assault on Tucson's supply lines. It was a lie, but it bought time. Holt would need to keep Clara alive to debrief her. You're saying more attacks are coming? Holt asked. Yes, sir, Clara said. But I'll only share details with Colonel Ramsey in Tucson. Holt considered, then nodded. All right, but these to come too. They have information, Clara said firmly. She knows supply routes. He knows Apache tactics. Ezekiel reached into his saddlebag, pulling out a document with military seals. Captain, there's something else. Nurse Thompson's been selected for a special reconnaissance unit. Holt examined the papers, confused. These orders are from a unit I've never heard of. Because it doesn't officially exist, Ezekiel said smoothly. The lie was bold, but it worked. Holt handed the papers back. You've got 48 hours to report to Colonel Ramsey. After that, we come looking. As the bounty hunters rode off, Lillian spoke. What happens now? Clara helped her mother onto her horse, her touch uncertain but gentle. Now we find my father. Our family's been broken long enough. Ezekiel smiled, a rare warmth in his eyes. Jonah's waiting in Nevada. He's been saving for years, hoping to build a life for a family he didn't know he had. For what? Clara asked. A homestead, Ezekiel said. In Oregon, far from anyone who cares about your past. They rode north, the desert giving way to rolling hills. Lillian wrestled with the weight of her choices, while Clara grappled with her new identity. Ezekiel led the way, his plan clear, reunite a family torn apart by cruelty and circumstance. In Nevada, they found Jonah in a small town, his carpenter's shop filled with the scent of sawdust. He was older now, his hair graying, but his eyes still held the kindness Lillian remembered. When he saw her, his tools fell from his hands. Lillian, he whispered. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. Jonah, there's someone you need to meet. Clara stepped forward, her resemblance to both parents undeniable. Jonah's breath caught. My daughter? The reunion was tentative, each word a step toward healing. Jonah told Clara of his life, his love for Lillian, and the pain of losing her. Clara shared her years in the orphanage, her work with the Buffalo Soldiers, and her newfound understanding of her heritage. Ezekiel watched from a distance, his role as catalyst complete. But Lillian approached him. Why did you do this? After everything I did to you? Because redemption isn't just for you, Ezekiel said. It's for all of us. I carried hate for years. Letting it go freed me as much as it freed you. The family settled on a homestead in Oregon, a fertile valley where they built a life free from the shadows of their past. Clara trained as a doctor, Jonah crafted furniture, and Lillian taught local children, finding purpose in giving others the education she'd once denied Ezekiel. Ezekiel visited occasionally, his bounty hunting days behind him. He'd found peace in helping others find theirs. The homestead became a haven, a testament to the power of forgiveness over vengeance. Years later, as Lillian sat with her grandchildren, she reflected on the auction block in Redemption Valley. Ezekiel hadn't bought her to punish her, but to give her a chance to rebuild what she'd broken. Justice, she realized, wasn't about settling scores, it was about creating something new from the ashes of the old. Thank you for reading A Reckoning in Redemption Valley. This story explores themes of violence, injustice, and the complex path to redemption. What are your thoughts on how the characters confronted their pasts? Do you believe justice was served? Or should violence and injustice be met with harsher consequences? Share your opinions in the comments below. I would love to hear your perspective and discuss what these themes mean to you.